What I've tried to do in these books is to put out there very clearly a virtue-based approach to parenting, because there's no question now that the wisdom of 2,000 years, the wisdom of modern psychology, the wisdom of neurobiology, all points to the need for virtues. And if we don't raise children with virtues, we've got rocks in our head.
Hello and welcome to another Perusia podcast. I'm Shaba Reis, your host, and I'm excited to have a longtime friend now, former colleague, boss, now partner in our apostolate, author, former principal, teacher, professor, and now moved from Sydney to Melbourne and is adjunct professor of character in Notre Dame, none other than Dr. Andrew Mullins, the author of this exciting book, Parenting for Character, and now Parenting for Character Applied. And we're excited to be publishing this at Perusia, and he joins me now in the studio. Andrew.
Good on you, Charbel. Great to be here, mate.
Thanks
great to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see. Always great to see you.
Yeah.
I was just reflecting of when I first met you. It actually goes back before I started working at Redfield. So we've known each other since Redfield College days, a private school in northwest Sydney. And in 2005, I was a student teacher. So I did my 3-week prac. So you were headmaster of Redfield then. That's 19 years ago. Do you believe that?
Yeah, we're all old.
19 years ago. And then I remember I actually applied for a role there, but I was finishing my studies, and as a PE teacher. And then you invited me to come and consider a role, and I've come back, and it's the best decision I made. And thank you for calling me up that day. That was in 2008, the year of World Youth Day, Sydney. And I was currently working at Belmore Boys, my former high school, and you called me up, and I remember initially saying no, and then you said, have a think about it. And I'm glad you said that, because I did think about it, and I did have a conversation with my supervisor at the time, and he said you probably should consider that role, and it was the best decision I made.
That's very, very nice.
Thought I would end my career at Redfield, not start. I wanted to experience elsewhere, but the timing was perfect, and I'm just so grateful for that phone call, because that introduced me to a whole world in Redfield, the great families, Pared, and our first ever Perusia event was held at Redfield, 2009. Right. Tim Staples.
I remember it vividly.
So you were there. You hosted the very first public event for Perusia, and the rest is history. And I think right away, I went from a couple of years full time, then I sort of asked for part time, and that's allowed me to sort of grow and expand Perusia, and here we are.
And meanwhile, how old was you're just married?
Yeah, I married in 2006, had our first child, Michael, in 2007. And so then working, when I started at Redfield in 2008, so yeah, in 2005 I wasn't married, I was only engaged.
I remember coming out to your place and there was a baby. That's what I remember.
There you go, so that would have been Michael. 2008 we had Raphael, so Raphael was soon after. He's only 14 months apart from Michael. We've had 7 others since, so there's 9 now, 9 children.
What a gift.
And we, this topic we're going to talk about today, parenting for character, obviously it's something we've had to learn over the years. And it's something, when you get married, you're not given this sort of manual of how to raise children typically. And there's so many pieces of advice. But and people have
advice is cheap.
That's right. But getting in there, getting your hands dirty, learning really the hard way, sink or swim, but also reading, good books and learning from those who have gone before you, or learning from others. You yourself, you are not a parent yourself, which is interesting. But you've worked with parents.
I often preface my talks now by saying I'm a hypocrite because I don't have children, but I write books about parenting. It's
Can I ask, how long have you been involved in this space of, character, teaching about virtue and character building?
Yeah,
how far back does this go?
I started, Redfield, which is the school I ended up as the headmaster of, started in 1986. I was teaching in the government system, and I came across to Redfield, and I discovered there an approach to education where we were emphasising character and virtues a lot. And then I became in charge of that program at Redfield within a few years, and it was a mentoring program, a lot of contact with parents, a lot of contact one-on-one with children. And I realised how powerful the whole idea of focusing on developing strengths of character is in young people. And particularly if all of the influences on a child are in sync. So if the school is also emphasising strengths of character and the parents are as well, it becomes a very powerful formula to raise children. Add to that, of course, that Catholic teaching is that the moral virtues or the human virtues are informed by grace, but these are the foundations of the supernatural life. And it's really important for us to establish in the children in our care the great strengths of character. If we don't do that, they can very easily drift into habits which completely undermine their future as well as their faith, right?
That's so true.
It's a big issue. I like to talk a lot about, let me step back a little bit if you like.
Yeah, please.
Because once we started talking about virtues a lot at Redfield, and that really is directly attributable to St. Josemaria, who talked about how grace builds on nature, which is quoting some Thomas Aquinas, but he talked a lot about human virtues, and he's got beautiful writing on human virtues. And then I realised, hang on, step back. I mean, this is the language of classical literature, because I've taught a lot of Latin as well, right? And you go back to the Iliad or the Odyssey, or you go back to
Great
Virgil and the Aeneid, and you realise we don't write this way anymore. It's full of references to virtues. And this is not even a Christian world. This is just universal wisdom about what human beings need and are. And it got me thinking. So you've got classical wisdom, you've got the Bible obviously talking about virtues a lot, you've got our own lived experience, how we realise our lack of habits sometimes stymies us. And then on top of that, it's the best wisdom about raising children. And then add to that, you might be familiar with the name Martin Seligman. Martin Seligman was probably the biggest name in psychology in the 1990s, with a lot of work on adolescent depression, very important work. And then he kick-started positive psychology in more or less 2000, a little bit later. And he said, the time has come to start talking about strengths that will make us mentally well. Virtues, he used the word virtues. We've talked about mental illness too long, now let's talk about mental wellness. Now, there's some issues with positive psychology which are probably a little bit too subjective and too focused on personal impressions of well-being and here and now. But all that said, it's beautiful to see the most famous psychologist in the world is saying we have to return to the language of virtue.
Interesting.
And then, I'm sorry, I'm going on and on.
Yeah, please, this is great.
But virtue ethics in philosophy was a non-entity in the first half of the 20th century. But then, particularly through the work of Elizabeth Anscombe in 1958, she said, stop. We have to stop talking about what human beings should do until we know what a human being is. And therefore, with that sort of complete psychology, then you're able to talk about ethics. And of course, virtues are in the realm of ethics. It's not finished, because then I did my doctorate in 2008 onwards for 4 years, focusing on what happens in our brains when we build character, particularly when the 4 cardinal virtues are established in our personalities. And you realise that there's a lot of neurobiological evidence that virtues have very much a material basis. Obviously, we're not just material beings, but if you go back to Aquinas, he's very clear as well that there's a material component in this. You just need a very strong philosophy to support the idea that we're just not clever animals, if you like. Stop there. But long answer short, is that what I've tried to do in these books is to put out there very clearly a a virtue-based approach to parenting, because there's no question now that the wisdom of 2,000 years, the wisdom of modern psychology, the wisdom of neurobiology, all points to the need for virtues. And if we don't raise children with virtues, we've got rocks in our head.
Yeah, wow. I hope by the end of this episode, people, they're going to learn so much just about the need of this. It's powerful. And it's a reminder for me as well, all of us. Virtue, why? So you said it's making a comeback, or people are starting.
Yeah.
So there was a time where we stopped talking about virtues.
Yeah, very much so.
Why do you think that's the case? Why?
Yeah,
did
very
we
much
stop
so. I
talking
mean,
about it?
almost the word value substituted virtue for a long time.
I hear that all the time. Yes.
It's an issue, and you can have the value of getting up in the morning, but you'll still press the snooze button.
Interesting.
Unless you've got the good habit of getting up in the morning, because think of virtues as good habits.
Okay.
So, and that really comes straight from Aristotle in whatever it is, 2,300, 2,400 years ago. He gives us the first comprehensive explanation of what character is on the basis of good habits. And take that further, because we always talk about the 4 cardinal virtues, don't we?
Yeah, can we list those? What are they?
Yeah, so think of, I'll use the classical terminology. Yep. So prudence, justice, fortitude and temperance. But you can talk about temperance as self-control, courage or fortitude, justice, sound judgment, could be prudence.
Okay.
But think of how, and really it takes Thomas Aquinas, and I want to talk in a minute about how Thomas Aquinas Christianizes Aristotle. But temperance and fortitude are the ways that we manage our emotional reactions. So they're habits of how we manage our emotions. And justice and prudence are the way we make decisions.
Okay.
And the wisdom of this is gold. Sometimes you find books about virtues in schools, and it's a long list of 50 virtues, like a wish list of qualities of character. And
I was going to ask, do we have a list of virtues out there?
Yeah, but there's a problem with that, right? I mean, obviously they fall, the virtues in a sense fall in 4 categories, but if you just think of a long wish list of virtues, there's no rationale behind that. They're just all the same. They're all sort of different qualities that you'd like. But that's not the original conception of virtue at all. Aquinas explains it brilliantly. He says we need a good habit, we need the good habit for each of our great domains of action. And so we have a domain of action where we can seek things that are pleasurable, and that's temperance. We have a domain of action where we can seek things that are challenging goals, but we really do need to attain those goals, and that's fortitude. We have a domain of action where we have the capacity to make choices, and that's justice. And we have a domain where we can discern what is true, and that's prudence. Wow. This is very important. Yeah. So they each have their distinct role. They're not just amorphous qualities of character. And if you don't have the box and dice, then you won't have a strong character. Take this further, that justice, Aquinas explains, is a virtue of the will. And if you don't make every choice informed by the needs of the people around me, not only will you be selfish, but you certainly won't be virtuous. It's a big, big issue, this. We've forgotten about justice as the virtue that has to be in every single choice we make. And that's why we have a planet which is becoming more and more self-centered.
Yes.
I mean, I'm exaggerating, but it's a big issue. They do studies of self-centeredness, narcissism. They produced in the States a narcissistic personality inventory in like the early 1990s, and they've re-administered that now to identical groups of students, but 20 years on, and they realise, hang on, these guys aren't doing as well as they did 20 years ago. We're becoming more narcissistic. We're becoming more self-centered.
Wow.
We're forgetting justice in everything is very important.
You see that in a lot of the our advertisements, our billboards, the messaging. Worry about yourself. The most important person is yourself, and this inward looking, and and that's not really what we're called to. If we're social beings, we really got to be out there for each other as well.
We recently had the prelate of Opus Dei. Opus Dei has been very big influence on my life, right? Yes. The prelate of Opus Dei was here recently, and he talked about, I took 4 3 or 4 takeaways from his time in Melbourne. The first one, prayer is powerful. Second one is we can't take our eyes off Jesus on the cross. And the third one was, it's all about others.
Wow.
We have to make sure that our life is all about others. We can't spend our lives filling our heads with our junk, you know?
So
and
true.
obviously parenting is a shortcut to that.
Yes.
But you know, there's a lot of this jargon creeping into our world about me time, and the Pope's been railing against the idea of individualism and individualistic sort of the profound individualism of our age, with very good reason, because it's making people unhappy to start with, but it's certainly completely hamstringing our parenting.
That's so interesting. I mean, we're seeing it all the time. Young people and old now. I mean, with the headphones in, we're not looking at each other in gatherings, on transport. The devices are definitely, you could line up a bus and pretty much 99%
That's
of
very funny, isn't
people
it?
are not engaging or talking or interacting or noticing anyone's there. It's just, we are in our own world, aren't we? And is that producing happiness? Is that producing joy? Is that producing fulfillment?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, because it's been a pretty heavy start to an interview.
I know.
But let me just flip it now, and let's talk about the emotions and how emotions are our motivators.
Okay.
We do the things we love. So another way of looking at virtue is virtue enables us to pursue the things we love with choice, not with just impulse, which could be, you know, you can love food in the fridge, but it may not be good for you. You can love a lot of things. You can love pornography, but that's a disaster, right?
Yeah.
There's two great motivational systems that we have in our personalities, right? One is simply this subconscious pursuit of desires that have been conditioned into our personality. So, you know, you might have a desire to go running, but you've been running for the last 5 years. You just don't even have to think about it. You just put your shoes on and go for a run. That's a conditioned love, if you like. But we also have the capacity to love the things that we choose. And that's the brilliance of virtues, because it's the great marriage of emotion and rationality. So we pursue the things that we love to the point that they're good for us. And that's why a guy like Rafa Nadal, the tennis player, can say, I have learned to love suffering in practice, or in the injuries I get playing tennis.
Wow.
Because whatever comes our way, we have to love it. If we're an integral person where we don't get dragged one way by our emotions and by our convictions in another. Back on joy. I hope I can explain this clearly enough.
That'd be great.
But I like to talk to parents a lot, not just about their example, but their emotional example. Because how do children learn to manage their own emotions? We know that children learn emotions through the faces of their parents and the body language of their parents. That's how very little children pick up emotional responses.
So if you're smiling,
that's right.
They will mimic that, mirror that. If you've got a frown.
Mirror is the word.
Yeah,
mirror
okay.
neurons, right?
That's true.
And there's a whole sort of field of study now which argues that the very basis of learning emotional responses is imitation, right? In that way. But it's not just about learning emotion, learning anger, because my dad gets anger. A woman told me once, you know, whenever my husband starts to get angry, I have these awful flashbacks to his father, because his father was an angry guy, you know.
Wow, okay.
I mean, it's, you know, unfortunately we learn a lot of emotion from our parents, but it's not just about the emotions that we learn. I think there's a very strong case to say that we learn about what is good, true and beautiful from the joy that gives to our parents. So the joy on your face when you encounter something which is good, true and beautiful teaches your children that that's something desirable. So you can imagine how much mischief that works if a parent is joyful when they're playing computer games, and that's the time when their child sees them most joyful. I mean, it completely decalibrates that child's understanding of what's good, true and beautiful.
Wow. Video games specifically, or is there an
Whatever.
example?
I mean,
so anything that is...
We've got to be sensitive to the idea that our emotions are the great motivators, not only in our own lives, but our emotions are the motivators of the children in our care. Kids will do the things we love.
Yeah.
You know, children... you know who I heard that first from? Steve Ray.
Okay.
Steve
yes.
Ray, he just dropped this one-liner
Yeah.
when he was talking to the parents at Redfield.
Yes, I remember that day.
He said, children love what we love.
Yeah.
And the Pope's been on about it a lot, you know, that we have to show the joy of our faith. Children will love, because joy is a consequence of love.
Yeah, wow.
Dig into that. If you and I are not joyful, what's it mean? It means that there's not much love in my life.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
There's so much. I think we need a full course here. Are you touching on all these topics in these books?
They do, and particularly
wonderful.
particularly in Parenting for Character Applied.
Excellent.
There's a lot of focus on this idea of emotional example.
Excellent.
And it's also in the second edition, which you have of
Yes.
of Parenting for Character.
Yeah, this is exciting. It's revised and updated as well. So
Yeah, and I'm grateful to you for doing that, because it enabled me to put specifically in this content about emotional example, which I originally wrote that book before I did my studies in neurobiology.
Okay.
And once I'd done those studies in neurobiology, a few things jumped out at me. This idea of emotional example.
Yes.
The idea of our attention, we have to audit our attention. Where our attention is going tells us what we love.
Yes.
I mean, if you spend all your life looking at your phone, well, draw the conclusions. You know, I mean, it's an issue. You know,
reap what you sow, and
Yeah.
what
and the
you
thing
decide
and
that
helping
comes
a
in.
child, therefore, start to have a real mindfulness. And there's no mindfulness is a much used word now, but if we use it properly, it's okay. Have a mindfulness about where their attention is going, because if their attention is completely dissipated in things which are not helpful for them, that's catastrophic in
And
their,
you're finding
in their
that
development.
in the modern culture now, it's more relevant. It's more widespread. I mean, and technology has probably been a big part of that. It's so accessible now to distract us.
That's right. That's right.
So wow. So it does come with.
I have a really
challenges.
funny story about this thing of faces.
Yes.
This comes from a good friend of mine who always has colourful stories. But he said, I was very cranky, he said, with my daughter. My 10-year-old daughter got me angry. So he went into the laundry to wash his face, to compose himself, and he was not going to come out until he'd completely mastered his emotions. He was not going to get cranky at his daughter again. So he does the washing of the face and he composes himself, takes deep breaths. Finally, he opens the door and comes out into the room where his daughter is. And immediately his daughter jumps behind the mother and says, "Daddy has got the face." He thought he had fixed his face, but he was still angry.
Interesting.
So we don't know how we come across sometimes.
Yeah.
And, you know, they talk all about this nonsense about hostile resting faces or hostile bitch faces or whatever, right? Resting bitch face, right? But there's a danger that we don't realise that we're constantly being observed by the kids in our care.
Yeah.
And if we're not joyful, we're not teaching the kids to be joyful, but more importantly, we're not giving them any way of calibrating what's important in life.
Can I touch on that? I've heard recently just what I guess what we celebrate and what we condemn. So, and this can influence a child from such a young age. Whatever we say,
that's right.
Well
Spot
done.
on. Yes.
You know, and whatever we emphasise there, they're like, oh, you like that.
So it's not just the joy; it's also the things that we disapprove of will come out in our emotions, and that's also a lesson. But
that's just as important.
Just as important. But of course, you want 5 times more joy than disapproval, right? And it was interesting. We've got Taylor Swift here at the moment, right?
Yeah.
And I was reading an article in the paper about the songs that she composes, and I'm not. You know, I'm neither a Swiftie nor a critic of Taylor Swift, right? But the issue is that she said most of her good songs are songs about breakups and things like this, right? And I'm thinking, whoa, what's going on here? I mean, and I've seen this also in other people writing about songwriting, that their best songs are when they're moody and talking about sad themes. And I'm thinking, what is this saying about the predominant emotions sometimes in our lives? And what is this communicating to the kids in our care, that life is a problem or what?
Yeah, that's right.
We've got to be careful because our life is full of faith, and that means that we've got a spring in our step.
It's a real interesting just a quick one on music, because a lot of the musicians who are writing expressing their personal experiences and hardships.
Yes.
And it's so interesting to see people who, even young kids who have not had any of those experiences, but singing along as if they've had. And it's almost like...
And I was thinking, take
have we
this
thought
further.
about this?
We're talking, this podcast is completely switched now
I know.
because I want to
We're
talk
gonna-
about the Beatles for a minute.
okay.
Because the Beatles, think about the early Beatles songs. Love Me Do.
Yes.
Please, Please Me.
Yeah.
I Want to Hold Your Hand. She Was Just 17. They're all songs of joy. They're all songs of joy. That's why they're so attractive.
There you go.
So, I mean, obviously you infuse emotion in something that's powerful.
Yeah.
But you can either infuse negative emotion or positive, joyful emotion. It's quite
There
interesting.
you go. I want to have a dedicated podcast on music one day because I think it is an interesting topic. Parenting.
Yes, back to it.
Okay, so yourself, with all your experience, the studies, and this is fascinating, parents to understand this
Yeah.
and to do something about it with
Yeah.
their children from such a young age,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Now, there are people of all experiences watching, people who have not parented before, people who have no kids, people who have just gotten married, people who have either adopted or foster kids. There are those who
Yeah.
have just started their families, 1 or 2 kids. There are those who are well experienced.
Yeah.
You really deal with these principles are important for across the
Yeah.
across the whole
Yeah.
journey, right?
And I think it's important to, I mean, you've seen the book, you've edited the book, you know that it's not about theory. There's a lot of practical stuff
Absolutely.
in there. And the most important thing I think also for all of us is that, whenever we're working with children, we're the great winners. Sure, we want to help children, but to be able to guide a young person to achieve their potential is something, it's a great gift.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
And if a person, the more successful a person is in doing that, the greater sense of accomplishment, if you like. But we're raising children for heaven. We're not just raising kids
Yes.
for successful careers. And the good thing is that virtues will lead them to both, because the human virtues and the moral virtues are the foundation of faith, hope and charity in many ways, right? Obviously faith, hope and charity are gifts. But think of prudence, for example. Prudence is about, I'd like to think in terms of 3 things. Prudence means that you're living in reality, and think of all the poor kids challenged with gender dysphoria at the moment, and they're being led along by their peers or by very poor policies in schools or whatever, right? So living in reality, having a conscience that really does tell you what's right and wrong, and being able to set goals for yourself effectively. They're the 3 sort of marks of prudence, if you like, right? But what does faith do to that? Faith informs prudence by giving us a completely enhanced reality. That my reality is not just here in this material world. God is my Father, and in everything I can have a spring in my step. That God's got my back.
That's right.
He's looking after me, and I have an eternal destiny, and I really just want to be grateful and be faithful to that calling. So that's how the theological virtues inform the moral virtues. That they're not 2 distinct things, but faith informs prudence, so that then you are in an enhanced reality where everything I do is informed by my faith.
Yeah, wow.
If that makes sense.
That's interesting because you touched on the 3 theological virtues: faith, hope, and
Charity. Yeah. And Thomas Aquinas does the same thing with charity.
Okay.
In one place he says that justice is the virtue of the will, but in another place, and this would be, it's not incompatible, but he says that charity is the virtue of the will. For a person with faith, every choice we make is informed by charity. In other words, take this further, that every single thing we do can be an expression of love of God. So when you go to work, your whole day can be an expression of love of God, because your actions are informed by charity first of all. If
It's
that
very
makes
profound.
sense.
Absolutely. So to instill this in our children,
Yes.
and I
Starts
recommend...
with joy. Starts with joy.
in yourself.
Yeah.
And so
That we've
where
got-
to start for a parent? It's with themselves, right? I mean, and where do they begin to,
Good.
I guess, working on themselves, and then they can model and parent their children?
So this book, although the format of the book is a lot of different
Love this book.
things that you can do with friends, you can do it together with your spouse, you can sit in a room and do it on your own. There are case studies, there are informative bits and pieces, there's little paragraph, there's a little essay at the start of each chapter. There are many references to famous people and quotations and stuff like that. But ultimately, a person can say, I'm working through a book, or I'm picking pieces out of a book on parenting, but you will walk away knowing, gee, this has helped me a lot. This has helped me a lot to understand myself and to work on my character.
Yes.
For 4 years I was working with students, second year officer cadets in ADFA, which is the Australian Military College.
Okay, wow.
And I would give them a very detailed audit of their own character, and they loved it.
Wow.
They just felt it was so useful for them, you know.
Do you have any of that in here? Or?
Yeah, it's coming in various shapes and forms. It's all there.
That's fantastic. I have to say, there is a contrast between the reading book and the workbook. The reading book is very thorough. You cover so many ideas, and the way you break that down. So I highly recommend, if no one has this, get this. Very affordable. I recommend everyone just read this in your own time. But then,
and there's an ebook as well, isn't there?
That's right. So we have the ebook. So on our website, perusiamedia.com, and it's available worldwide. It's available out there on Amazon, on our website, on whatever platform is easy to get them. But then this is where it gets really, really interesting, because you can now sit down with your spouse and really nut out. Almost like have a bit of an examine of your own habits, and then you start to look at what your values are and taking them up. How do we improve ourselves? But then how do we start modeling this for our children? And this is what I want to start getting into, these habits. How do we start making changes in the right direction?
Yeah, good.
This is going to help us.
Good.
It's also a practical guide as a group study too, which would be grab some friends, 4 or 5 couples. Sit in your lounge room and discuss this, work maybe once a week, get together. And dare I say, maybe even at a parish level, could parishes start hosting parenting nights and do that once a month and get together and work
It's
that
certainly
through.
possible, very possible.
You've broken it down. So the book, there's quite a few chapters. In this one, there's 9. You've got 9 ideas. So 9, and I love the opening. The opening is just very simple. Is your family a school of love?
Yeah.
You've touched on that. And I love how you've just said, everything I do in my day is a show of love. A love for God, and also a love for our spouse and a love for our children.
Can I preface this?
Can you do that?
Let me preface this with something that happened a long, long time ago. Do you remember that Moses got all of the Israelites in front of him before they crossed the river?
Yes.
And he says to them, look, you've got to love God with everything you've got. Your whole heart and soul. In other words, you've got to love with everything, heart and soul and strength, right? And then do you know what he says next? He says, make sure that you tell your kids this.
That's right.
Talk about it around the table, put it on your walls, wear it on your
on
clothing,
your forehead,
put it on your forehead.
Yep.
You must not forget that you've got to love God with everything. What's next? Because when you cross the river and go into the land of milk and honey, there will be so many distractions that you will be tempted to forget this.
Profound.
And we are in the land of milk and honey now.
Yeah.
And that we are forgetting God now.
Isn't it interesting?
He's talking about our society as well as the Jewish world.
Wow.
That as soon as we get distracted, we get immersed in the material things around us, whether it's phones or music or whatever. We forget God. And part of the whole task of a spiritual life is to say, no, I don't want to forget God through my day. I start with the morning offering. I'll do some time of prayer. I'll try to visit the Blessed Sacrament if I'm Catholic. I'll say the Rosary. You peg things in the day.
Yes.
So I don't leave God out of the picture. Now, and we need to do that because we're highly distractible. We are all ADD. It's a very interesting problem, right?
True.
And where do the virtues come into this? Well, temperance is all about filtering out the distractions so that we only pursue things that we enjoy at the right time. That's what temperance is.
Wow.
It's having the self-control to filter out the milk and honey when it's not right for us. Very interesting.
Amazing. I mean, it is a lie we're told throughout our life. The idea of freedom is to do whatever you want as often as you like, to whoever you like, and you don't even think about the consequences, but you play that out and very quickly this is what leads to addictions. This is what leads to,
that's right.
In the name of freedom, we actually pretty much enslaved to something, and we can't live without a particular thing.
And it's in the end, it's a whole confusion about what freedom is, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Freedom is somehow following that first definition of love, which is just unconscious desires. Whereas we've got to make choices which are founded in reality, because a lot of people make choices and they justify anything they like in their lives. They justify walking out on their wife or their husband. They justify doing pornography.
Yeah, that's right.
We can give ourselves reasons for anything. and we've got to fight it, you know.
Absolutely. What are the, so I love that. You go on, I mean, maintaining unity. Are you talking about the
Unity,
couple?
first of all, between mum and dad, but
Yep.
whenever a child's involved, there needs to be consistent messages.
What's an example that you see that we got to be wary of? I know my children do this to me all the time. You know, Dad, can I have this this chocolate? I said, I'll say no, but then they'll go over to Mum, and then they'll ask her for the same thing, and she may say yes.
Yeah, I got a telling story about that.
And then what happens is that the children very quickly pick up that. Yeah. Oh, I can always go from one to the other,
That's right.
and if I don't like the answer from one, I'll go to the other.
That's right.
And we've sort of learned to say, what does Mum say, what does Dad say? But really, it's a real problem and a danger for parents to be divided, especially in front of the kids.
Yeah.
So what do you recommend? I mean, my mother gave me this advice.
Go on.
Was the best thing she could do, even if she disagreed with my father, she would not correct him in front of us.
Yes.
But later on, by herself, in the room, she would say, what you said earlier today, I don't agree with.
That is gold.
And then they had a conversation.
Yeah.
Is this what you're speaking about here? But you give more sort
I
of...
think your mother should have written the book. That's gold, isn't it?
But it is, and I sort of practice it now.
Because when we deliver messages to kids, corrections to kids, and we're uptight or we're angry, the kids will always say, well, Mum's angry.
Yeah.
But to do it afterwards, calmly, is gold.
Yeah, the worst thing you could do as couples is disagree in front of your kids. And then you're having an argument and they're sort of watching, okay, this is interesting. And they sort of sneak out. So we've got to be, that's a real trap, isn't it? So
There was a gentleman, a friend of mine told me a story, tough story. Friends of his got, the children of some good friends of his, and his son was very good friends with one of those boys. Several children died in a car accident. And the father said, my son came to me and said, can I spend the day with that family? And he said, I would always say, of course. I would always say, of course, because they were such good friends. I don't know why I said this, but I said, what did your mother say? And mother had already said, no, I don't want you to go to spend the day with that family because we've actually got other family plans. That day, those children died.
Wow.
And he says, I don't know why. I said, no, I don't want you to go today. But that saved his son because he was insisting on consistency. It's an extraordinary story, isn't it?
Wow.
Tough one.
Yeah, so unity is super important. We've touched on the virtues, so I won't. You've got a chapter dedicated to the cardinal virtues.
Yes.
And you've sort of done a great job there.
There's a chapter on how you communicate with your kids.
Yeah, can we? Great, let's go there. You've got a bunch here. Claiming space, fix your face. You've touched the face. That's very powerful. But let's talk about that one. How do you communicate with your kids?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good wisdom on this, right? But and sometimes we're not aware of the challenges. But give you one of the best stories I know about this, right? Is some good friends of mine in the west of Sydney, and universally respected and liked, right? And I asked the father, what's the story? How come, your kids are growing up beautifully and they're leaders in their classes and they work hard and they fantastic sportsmen and they have great respect for their teachers and all their peers love them. What's going on? And he said, when my oldest boy was 6 years ago and he was in year 7, he did something I wasn't happy with. And he's a big man, but he said, I spoke to him quietly and I said, I didn't like this, like your mum, right? And he said, I was so proud of my boy because when I spoke to him like that, he had tears in his eyes. And then a week later, the same behaviour came back. He thought, this isn't my son's problem, this is my problem. So from that point onwards, he said, I'm going to go for a walk or sit down with my son every week and help him have a goal for the week, but it's going to be his goal.
Wow. So
for 6 years, he's raised his boy, so his son has a clear goal that he himself has bought into. And through that way, he's nourished his character and he's given us the man he's given us, right? It's extraordinary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Think of John Paul's father, St. John Paul's father. Every afternoon he would go for a walk with his son. He gave the world John Paul II. And meanwhile, all of his father's friends are saying, the Germans are coming, come back to the army. And John Paul's dad knows better. He's given us John Paul.
Amazing. It's an important point, a practical tip for parents.
One-on-one.
Finding that
Gotta
one-on-one
be
time.
one-on-one.
And even this is important for large families as much as it is for small.
Yeah.
For those large families, what do you say if they say, "Oh, it's just so busy, and how are we going to find time to get one-on-one? That's just it's not practical at all."
Yeah.
I've got 9 children myself. How do we do it?
It's a big task.
It doesn't always have to be a formal date where it's at a restaurant or at some sort of.
That's right.
It could be just a very simple.
That's right.
Little stroll. I'm taking out the trash outside. Come with me, and we have a quick chat down the driveway, and spend a few moments.
And affection is gold. Affection is gold, obviously. Affection is a great motivator. We know a lot about how there are triggers for plasticity, for learning, and including moral learning, right? And one of those is affection, novelty, emotion. All of these things are triggers for plasticity and learning, right? Interesting issue.
Yeah. Do you? Is there a certain age? So as the child is growing, and you notice there is a bit of a change that happens as they become in the adolescence ages. There is, I guess, they're starting to discover things more, learn more things, starting to discover who they are, wanting to know a bit more of an identity, culture. I'm starting to see what they like and not like. More, they're looking at their friendships. It's quite interesting. Sometimes some have. And many parents might struggle with this, and those who start having teenagers, and attitude changes. What was okay a moment ago, now, like overnight, it's like they're now asking you, why do you care? Or there's this attitude that comes. Yeah. I mean, on one level, I know there are there chemical changes, are there real testosterone changes, things like that. That's a real thing to identify. Does the strategy change for the parent, though? Is there something that changes in your parenting style?
Yeah, good.
During the adolescence time?
Good question. There's a couple of issues there. One is, obviously, we have to be above the clouds. So we're not drawing our emotions from the emotions that we're getting back from kids.
Interesting.
That's really important. And Ross Campbell's How to Really Love Your Teenager is a fantastic book.
Okay.
Where he talks a lot about this. That's the parent's duty to emotionally nourish the child, not give back the same emotion we're getting if it's negative emotion or whatever, right? But it's also important for us to keep coming back to what's the whole task of raising children. The whole task of raising children is that they learn to love. And we can only love by choices when we're free, because they're my choices. So we have to keep enhancing the opportunities that the young person has to make choices, to act freely. We're teaching them to use their freedom when they're teenagers. David Isaacs, who wrote a beautiful book in 1980 or 1979 called Character Building, right? Mm-hmm. Which is like one of the first great books on character building. He talks about how the most important virtue for raising teenagers is to emphasize prudence, because they have to make their own choices.
Now sometimes...
so you keep throwing it back. I'm not going to do the thinking for you. You have to... And if you haven't done your homework, you have to sort this out. You have to go and talk to the teacher.
Okay.
It's, there's going to be bigger problems in life than this. You have to sort this one out. And you do it with a lot of affection, but, you watch. You step through this, explain to the teacher, and you'll learn something about this in life, right?
Is it a simple thing of, instead of just telling your child what's right from wrong, but actually asking them things and working it out, and through asking the right questions,
sitting
they
with
can
kids
think
is so
through.
important. Sitting with kids to help them think.
Yeah.
But then making sure it's their goal, Beautiful, a silly example, but a good example, right? I mean, in Australia we have this system of ATARs, and when you leave school, you've got to get the highest ATAR up to 100, right, or 99.95. And one dad walks in on his son in his room, and he's plastered up 2 years from the end of high school. He's plastered on his wall in front of his desk the number 99, and neither the boy's teachers nor the father thought he was going to get anything above 80. So the father says to his boy, this is a true story, the father says to his boy, "Do you think it's realistic? I don't want you to be disappointed." And the boy says to his dad, "Dad, I need a goal." It was the boy's own goal.
Wow.
He had decided. And the change in that young man, because I was one of his teachers, was incredible. this guy worked like I shouldn't say worked like a demon. He worked like a Trojan for the next 2 years.
Wow. He had a goal.
And he got
stuck to it.
98.6 or something
Got
ridiculous,
very
which got
close.
him into anything he wanted to get into,
Wow.
right?
There you go.
Extraordinary. But so when we're mentoring young people, teenagers, it's really important that we help them set their own goals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is
And guide them so that those goals are noble goals. I don't mean...
So how much, and that's, I guess that can be the great debate among parents and families, and it's unique. How much of the thinking do you do as a parent? And obviously at such a young age, yeah, there's a certain point where they can't do anything for themselves. You've got to actually let them know, this is good, this is not, don't do this. And there is a bit of cotton wool around them in the early, toddlers.
That's right.
They become in primary.
That's right.
Upper primary, they started now.
Yeah.
With the age of reason, you start. This is why we start.
Right.
Confession begins at a later age, 7 or 8 year old plus. And now they're starting to determine. Okay, this is right. This is wrong. They're still playful, still fairly innocent, but they're discovering things. They're testing things. 9, 10. We're now entering into what are the things we should have been doing along this way.
Yes.
Because as a profound quote you said. In the reading book, don't blame your child, by the time they're teenagers, if they don't want to spend time with you. If you weren't spending time with them,
you earn the right to be part of your child's teenage years if you've been part of their world when they were younger, in a sense, right? It's a hard one, right?
It's a real, I could. It really hit me just seeing a little cartoon graphic of the little child pulling on the dad's leg. Dad, trying to get the attention. Look at me, Dad, look at me. And the dad's busy doing something, work, busy looking at a screen, looking at the phone, and basically sending a strong message to their son or child or daughter. Whatever I'm doing here is more important than what you have.
Yeah.
And so that does play out.
Yeah.
And then you see, fast forward, when the child's 18, and the father is trying to get attention from their son or daughter, and they're like,
it's the old song,
don't have
isn't
time.
it? Cats in the Cradle, big time.
Wow.
Wow.
Earn the right to be a father or a mother. Earn the right to be called that. Earn that role. It just
lovely story from one young dad who's a good friend. I taught him years ago, and now he's a good friend, right? But he said, I was working in my office. I got a home office. I was working in my home office one evening, and my son, who's a toddler, comes to the door and says, Daddy, can I come in? Can I sit with you? And Dad says to the boy, look, I'm working. Can't you see that I'm working here? And the little boy says to his dad, Dad, I won't make any noise. I just want to sit with you. And of course, Dad's heart melted.
Yeah.
And the boy comes in, and he didn't disturb him. He sat there for the next hour or something, right? Just to be with his dad.
Yeah.
And it was a lesson. And my friend took the lesson on board because he told me the lesson. Very beautiful. That every moment we spend with children is gold, and they will be copying everything that they're seeing in some way, right? I mean, the mirror neuron dynamic is very real. We copy automatically without even thinking. So if a boy sits with you as you're working, it's not just learning to be close to Dad. It's also learning concentration. It's learning all sorts of things, right? It's beautiful.
Wow. I wish we had some. We haven't got much time, but I do want to ask the influence peers have on children, and so then sometimes with parents, it's common. A lot of parents might share ideas what they're doing in their family, or what's working, what's not, and so there's the parenting, the peers for the parents, but the influence peers have among the friends, your children's friends. Sometimes, if they're associating with friends who are, I guess, don't share those same values or don't share those things. How do you navigate these, and what tips do you suggest?
It's a really, and there's a balancing act, isn't there? Because obviously, as a parent, you're responsible for the influences coming into the life of your child, but there comes a point, obviously, when people are out working or they're at university, you have no management of those influences. So there's a zone in between where you're completely taking responsibility for all the influences, and the time when they're 16 or 17 and you have no control over the influences. There's a grey zone where you're teaching them to manage their own influences. So it's really important that there's a lot of conversation between you and your teenage child about the influences coming into their lives. And you know, if a peer is sometimes giving bad example, that your child doesn't necessarily walk away from them, because in university that'll be a person they're working with, right? But that they realise that, no, that's not good enough, but I can help them. So there's two things in my mind here. One, it's really important that we're raising children to look outwards, to serve their friends and society, not to closet them inside safe houses. This is really important, because the safe house notion won't work after a child is 17 or 18. And kids will be totally unprepared for life, and you will have completely shortchanged your children if you think it's just about protecting children.
How far is that? I mean, because that's where the great debate is.
Yeah, but it's a real debate, because there's kids who die from taking one ecstasy tablet when they're 15 with friends.
Yeah.
So they're making life and death choices then.
Yes.
So we've got to be, from very early teen years, we've got to be having very active conversations with a child about what's good and bad in life, and not just showing it on our faces, but the time for emotional formation is early.
Yes.
The time for education of the mind is 7 up, right? Or even earlier than 7. But so lots of conversation from 7 up, big time. How do you know if your words are hitting the mark? Only if your child opens their heart back to you. So if you don't have a relationship with a child where they're opening their heart to you, sorry, you do, but if you don't have a relationship with a child where they're opening their heart to you and you're opening your heart to them, you don't know what they're thinking, you can't educate them. And very often the reaction of parents is to just step out of the space, to say, well, I don't connect very well with my teenager.
And just give up.
And that's catastrophic.
Absolutely. So don't keep trying. The lesson there is keep trying. Show them that you love them. Show them that
a silly example, you know, my father, when I was 14 or 15, I had plans with my friends on a Friday night. And I get home and he says, no, you're not going out with your friends tonight. We're going to a play called Antigone. And I'd never heard of Antigone. But Antigone, of course, is one of the great plays of Sophocles, right? I went to it. It knocked me over. I've now taken kids to that play several times. Wow. I've taught scenes from Antigone as a teacher.
Wow.
It's still a go-to book for me, right? But if Dad hadn't kept trying, saying, I want to take my son to the theatre today, let's see if this works, where would you be?
Yeah. There you go.
Interesting problem. You've got to be in the game. Keep trying.
Keep trying. So that's a lesson. That sort of leads into my final question here, wanting tips for those who think it's too late. You know, my kids are grown up now. You know, I've got a few that have graduated school. Some have graduated uni. Yeah. Some already married. Yeah. To those parents who feel it's too late to start getting, what would you say to them?
Oh, well, obviously,
late.
Even when kids are 40, they're still asking their parents' opinion on things. So and there's a lot of people who come to their senses in their 20s and 30s, believe me.
Yeah.
But it's silly. There's one other big ingredient here, right? The other big ingredient, another story, I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did a conference once in Mount Maunganui in New Zealand.
Okay.
And Mount Maunganui is a beautiful headland, quite high and quite steep, with the ships long way below going into an estuary. And I went up there at dawn one day, which is a bit sort of pagan thing to sort of see the dawn rising. It was beautiful, right? And I'm sitting at the top on a rock, looking at the dawn. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
And then suddenly there's a guy coughing behind me saying, excuse me, you're sitting on my prayer rock. It was all a bit mock funny, right? But I stand up and say, I'm sorry. And we start talking. He's got his 14-year-old boy with him. And he says, I'm the Baptist minister of that town down there that you can see from the top. And I come up here 3 times a week to sit on that rock and pray over my people.
Oh.
It's a good thing that our God has big ears, that he's listening to our prayers.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of pain down there. What's the message? The message I took away from that is that when we've got a responsibility for people, our prayers are not only necessary, but they're powerful. There's no parent who comes to Jesus in the Gospels and asks for their child and gets denied. Parents don't get denied. So it's really important to pray for your kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pray for your kids, and it will turn out. How it turns out is in God's hands, but it will turn out. But keep up the prayers. I went to my granny once when I had a uni exam, and my granny was deaf, and I only discovered, sadly, when I was probably 16 or 17, you could talk to a person who was profoundly deaf. But I said to Granny, "Granny, will you pray for me? I've got an exam tomorrow." And she looked at me like in shock, and she said, "I've prayed for you every day of your life. Of course I'll pray for you." But isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, wow.
For kids to know that.
Absolutely.
You know?
Always there. So pray for your children.
Pray for your kids.
Them.
And,
Yeah, make sure
and it
you
will
do.
make you a saint, and it'll make them saints.
Pray as a family.
Yeah, for
as
sure.
well.
For sure.
And
For
I love
sure.
the idea of on prayer, pegging the day. So making sure there are things, concrete things that you're doing.
Otherwise we get
making time.
distracted by everything that's happening,
Yeah.
and we leave God out of the picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good. Wow. I'm excited. This is now officially out, officially launched. Parenting for Character Applied. There it is. And I think it's so practical. The case studies, the teachings, the working, the checklist. It's very well done. So congratulations on this great job. And
Good on you, mate.
Yeah, the more parents that can really apply, invest in, make some time in their children, I think about the investment that's going to have for your own family, for them, but also for society. And this, good, strong families will have impact on society. So this is crucial. This is a time when we need it more than ever. Let's really take this seriously. So thank you so much. We'd love to have you on again one day. And
Thank you, Charbel.
I
Great
see
to
a
be
course
here,
here. I have to see a course. We're only scratching the surface. We're not doing this any justice whatsoever. But I hope people learnt a lot about that. And do you have any sort of online presence? Is there a way if people want to reach you?
There are things on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, if you Google Andy Mullins,
Okay.
I put a number of units into a course on parenting, which is in the International University of Catalonia,
Okay.
and the books.
Yeah, fantastic. Now available, so excited, at perusiamedia.com. We've got both the reading book and the workbook. So
Good on you, buddy. Really
thank you.
good to be here. Thank
Great
you.
to have you. God bless.
Thank you very much, eh?
Dr. Andrew Mullins, I hope you learnt a lot in that, and he was just scratching the surface. Please do yourself a favour, get a copy today. Go to our website, we'll have the links below as well. And I hope, subscribe to this channel. If you're listening to this, subscribe to whatever podcast platform you're listening to, and share these with your family and friends. Please do that. Let this spread. The word of mouth is the best way to get this out there. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast and this series. I want to thank EWTN and all those out there who have been airing this and sharing this. So thanks to everyone. And all of you, pray for us. We're praying for you. Till next time, God bless.